Hello Dgens. By now I'm sure you've all had a pretty good go with Jane Doe in the 1.1 R&B undercover story, but what I do have today is early access to her in the creative beta server. So I've playtested her quite a fair bit, many hours to be honest, with a whole bunch of different team comps. So I'm going to showcase her and give you my thoughts on how exactly she plays with mildly coherent teams and a couple of decent discs. Now keep in mind that this is again the creator beta server, so things may change, but that being said, let's get started. So to summarize, Jane is super fun and has a similar ADHD playstyle to Nekomata, even more so to be honest. If you're a fan of like assassins, thieves, rogues, ninja kind of playstyles, I think that she is going to be right up your alley. And I would also say that her kit is really well designed and pretty straightforward, but what's cool is that there is enough complexity for us to make like gameplay optimizations to squeeze out a little bit of extra damage. Low skill floor, high skill ceiling. That said, the first thing that I would say is that although I described her as kind of like an assassin thief kind of class, the awesome thing about Jane is that she cleaves really freaking well. Because traditionally, dagger playstyles are pigeonholed into like single target DPS only roles, just hit one enemy, but Jane absolutely takes care of like groups of enemies together, which is so freaking important in this game. And so the thing that makes her like reasonably complex is that she has state management. In the top left hand corner up here, you can see that there is a blue bar. And so hitting enemies charges up that blue bar. And when it's full, we go into this red bar state, which is known as the passion state. This lets us build up physical anomaly faster, which means more assaults and in the long run, more damage. So you can probably tell by now, we want to get into this red passion state and spend as much time in it as we can. Now, the reason that this is so interesting is because there are skills such as the helicopter spin, which restores the red gauge whilst we're already in it. But on top of that, we've also got both the chain attack as well as the ultimate, instantly putting us into passion state. Therefore, one possible gameplay optimization is, for example, coming out of chain attack, making sure you trigger assault, and then using your ultimate for another one. For me personally, this is remarkably different to how I play Ellen, for example, where I almost always immediately ultimate after coming out of chain combo. So yeah, as you can see, her kit is straightforward, but it's complex enough to kind of get us thinking about what the next best move actually is. I'm a massive fan. And so from here, I want to talk about how Jane plays with team comps. Now, these are all of the team comps that I tested, and whilst testing these comps, I pretty much use like giga free-to-play gear. I'm talking only 4-star W engines like the Sucky. We've got no active mindscapes as you can see over here, none at all. And then lastly, we do have like these discs, they are maxed out, but anybody can max these out. And then of course, we've got the max levels, kind of unrealistic because we're all povo, but given another month or two, I'm sure we'll be at this state very soon. And to test this, I ran Shiyu 7's Thanatos over and over again. Yes, I am a bit of a masochist. And so to start things off, I was able to S rank with all of these teams that I showed before in Shiyu defense. All clears were between 2 to 2.5 minutes with every single team except for the Jane, Grace, Rina. That being said though, Chingy is probably misrepresented because of the Shiyu buff, because this bad boy right here benefits her the most. So I am going to strike her out. I will talk about the other teams. So coming back to these teams, Seth was actually the real MVP because he A, reduces the target anomaly build-up resistance, which means that we can trigger assaults faster. B, he's able to generate a shield which gives 100 anomaly proficiency, which just translates to straight damage for Jane. C, he's able to activate Jane's additional ability thanks to the faction bonus. And D, most importantly, he's the biggest contributor to stunning with his days. You guys are going to see really soon. This one is probably the most freaking important one. Now, what I do need to note is that there is a massive difference with using Seth with his signature W engine and without. And it's because of this guy down here, the anomaly build-up rate of EX special attacks / assist follow-ups increases by 36%. This anomaly build-up makes it so that you actually get the shocks for the disorder. And so the next two characters I wanted to talk about were actually Rina as well as Grace. Interestingly, when I put Grace and Rina and Jane Doe in the same team, this one was like the worst one. It took me about 3 minutes to clear Shiyu, which is still alright, but this is like a full S rank team, so it's kind of disappointing. And the last thing that I did want to note is Officer Cui over here. So this Lil Bang Boo, this guy is like an actual monster, because when we run anomaly teams like this, we don't have a lot of like strong direct damage like crits. So it's really hard to deal with those statues that don't get stunned and can't be affected by anomaly like assault. And so what happens is your boy Officer Cui, he actually goes in and bites the shit out of them, and that actually solves the problem. Now, it's only a problem with these towers over here, but it is something to keep in mind. So that said, I want to talk about each of these teams. Let's start off with Jane, Seth, Nekomata. Now, this team actually performed a lot better than I thought it would, and for me, it was the fastest clear. The main factor though was probably the statues, which again, Nekomata absolutely just tore through because she is a crit based carry. After that, it was just complete smooth sailing. I do think that if these towers didn't exist, the clear times would probably be a lot more even, but because they do exist and Nekomata just freaking ate them, that's where we're at today. In terms of general playstyle, I would spend most of my time in Jane and then pop into Seth when I needed a buff refresh. And then when assault was triggered, I would go into Nekomata and use her EX skill. Now, the one downside to this team is that Seth is the only non-physical unit, which means that he is the only one that could possibly proc Disorder. And to be honest, Disorder like pretty much didn't come up like at all, and if it did, the boss was already dazed. That said though, Disorder just didn't really feel as good as I thought it would, especially with the amount that the daze gave. It would only daze like 10, maybe like 13, something like that. I would say that parrying with Seth and Jane actually is infinitely more important. It gets you way more dazed than trying to trigger Disorder. Alright, and so the next team is Jane, Seth, and Rina. This one was really good as well. It just required remembering to switch into Rina to get that penetration bonus. Now, we were able to trigger Disorder like quite a fair bit in this case, but to be honest, again, Disorder is kind of like a nice to have. Rina's main job was to give the penetration to our Jane and then to leave quickly after. Now, one thing that I really didn't like about Rina is that Jane's playstyle is really fast, but then I got into Rina and everything felt really slow, especially when I triggered the defensive assist. And then we've got Jane, Seth, Lucy. Now, this one is really interesting because I know that Lucy has no synergy here. I would say that this is actually my favorite team, and looking at the rest of the lineup of teams, like this is actually probably the most free-to-play friendly version. So Lucy not only gives a massive attack buff, but she also has those little pigs who also jump those towers and helps take them down. But for me personally, what I really like about running Lucy is that her chain attack as well as her EX skills, they are exceptionally fast. So she takes up super little field time, and Jane is a freaking fiend for field time. All in all, this is probably the comp that I'm going to be running, even though I do have Grace. And speaking of Grace, let's talk about the Jane, Seth, Grace comp. Now, this comp absolutely cleared pretty well. However, it was also the comp that I liked the least in terms of playstyle, and the reason is because we've got both Jane and Grace trying to compete for field time. And to be honest, most of the time, what ends up happening is that you stay in Jane. And so in that case, Grace could actually just be somebody else, like your Lucy or your Nicole or another support. Now, what is nice about this team is that Disorder does trigger quite a fair bit, but I've talked about that like 3 times now. Again, I would rather focus on getting like parries with Seth or Jane and not have to allocate some of my brain power to triggering disorders, like getting the order right and stuff. And so yeah, that's kind of been my experience with Jane. I do think that she is super fun and I'm ultra keen to roll for her. That said though, I really thought that Jane was actually going to be really good with Grace, but when I played them together, especially with Rina, I was kind of let down by the team. Personally, I think that Grace needs a little bit of a buff or something. She, in my opinion, just doesn't actually play that well. And I know that some of you are going to be like, oh my god, look at Jane's additional skill. The additional ability is asking for another anomaly agent. That is literally Grace. They gotta work together. My answer to that is that in my experience, they just didn't really. That said though, I am going to be really keen to see how Jane performs with Bernice, who is an upcoming fire anomaly unit, but that is going to bring us to the end of the video. Let me know how you guys think Jane is looking. Are you going to pull for her? Did I play her right? Does she look strong? Does she look fun? But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.